The Liberation of Dachau, April 29, 1945. The 45th Infantry Division's discovery of the concentration camp. What American soldiers saw, how it changed them, and the confrontation with SS guards.
Welcome back, everyone. Today I need to tell you about something difficult. Something that changed every American soldier who witnessed it. Something that showed the world the true face of evil. This is the story of April 29, 1945, when American soldiers liberated the Dachau concentration camp in Germany. I want to warn you, this story is disturbing. It deals with the darkest chapter of human history. But it's a story that needs to be told, because the soldiers who were there never forgot what they saw, and they made sure the world would never forget either. By late April 1945, the war in Europe was almost over. Allied forces were deep inside Germany. The Nazi regime was collapsing. Hitler would be dead in 2 days. But American soldiers advancing through Bavaria had no idea what they were about to discover. The 45th Infantry Division, nicknamed the Thunderbirds, was pushing through southern Germany. These were experienced soldiers. They'd fought in Sicily, Italy, France, and now Germany. They'd seen combat, seen death, seen the destruction of war. They thought they'd seen everything. They were about to learn they hadn't seen anything yet. On April 29, 1945, units of the 45th Infantry Division approached the town of Dachau, a small Bavarian town about 10 miles northwest of Munich. Intelligence had mentioned something about a prison camp in the area, but nobody really knew what that meant. The soldiers expected maybe a prisoner of war camp, maybe a German military prison. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks was commanding the 3rd Battalion, 157th Regiment. His unit was ordered to investigate the camp and secure it. It seemed like a routine task, one more objective in a long list of objectives as they pushed through Germany. What they found was beyond anything they could have imagined. Private First Class John Lee from Arkansas described approaching the camp. "We could smell it before we could see it. This horrible, sweet, sick smell that hit you like a wall. None of us knew what it was, but we knew it was something bad, real bad." As they got closer, they saw the camp. High walls, Gower towers, barbed wire. It looked like a prison, but something about it felt wrong. The smell got stronger. And then they saw the train. On a railroad siding just outside the camp was a train of about 40 boxcars. The doors were open, and inside were bodies. Hundreds and hundreds of bodies.
Corporal Donald Waffle from Michigan was one of the first to reach the train. I looked in the first boxcar and I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was full of bodies, stacked like firewood. Skeletons, really. Some were still in striped uniforms. They looked like they'd been dead for days. Then I looked in the next car, more bodies. The next car, more bodies. Every single car was full of dead people. The train had been carrying prisoners evacuated from other camps as the Allies advanced. The prisoners had been locked in those boxcars without food or water for days. Most had starved or died of thirst. The SS guards had simply abandoned the train and fled. The soldiers stared in horror. Many vomited. Some cried. Lieutenant Harold Mayer from Pennsylvania later said, "We'd been fighting for years. We'd seen men killed in battle. But this was different. These weren't soldiers. These were innocent people who'd been murdered. And the way they looked, like walking skeletons. I'd never seen human beings look like that." But the train was just the beginning. The soldiers approached the main gate of the camp. Above the gate was an inscription in German. Arbeit macht frei. Work sets you free. It was a lie. A cruel mockery. The only way prisoners left this camp was dead. When the American soldiers entered the camp, They found thousands of prisoners still alive, but barely alive. These were men and women who looked like ghosts, emaciated to the point where you could count every bone in their bodies. Many were too weak to stand. Some were dying as the Americans arrived. Private First Class Robert Persinger from Ohio remembered, "They came towards us, these skeleton people in striped uniforms. They were crying, reaching out to touch us to make sure we were real. Some of them collapsed as they tried to walk. They'd been starved for so long they could barely move. And their eyes, I'll never forget their eyes. They looked like they'd seen hell." The American soldiers immediately began distributing their rations to the prisoners. But the medics quickly realized this was dangerous. The prisoners' bodies couldn't handle normal food after such prolonged starvation. Some prisoners who ate too much too quickly died from the shock to their systems. It was heartbreaking. They'd survived the camp only to die from eating the food their liberators gave them.
As the soldiers explored the camp, they discovered the full horror of what had happened there. Dachau had been the first concentration camp, opened in 1933, just weeks after Hitler came to power. For 12 years, it had been a place of systematic torture, medical experimentation, and murder. They found the barracks where prisoners had been packed so tightly they could barely lie down. They found the punishment cells where prisoners were locked in tiny spaces and left to die. They found the medical experimentation buildings where Nazi doctors had conducted horrific experiments on living human beings. And then they found the crematorium, the building where bodies had been burned. The ovens were still there, some still containing the remains of the last victims. Outside were piles of bodies waiting to be burned. The SS guards had fled before they could destroy all the evidence. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks later wrote, "Nothing I'd experienced in 3 years of combat prepared me for what we saw that day. We'd been fighting soldiers, men with guns who could shoot back, but this was murder, pure and simple. Industrial-scale murder." The American soldiers were overwhelmed with rage and grief. These were tough combat veterans who'd seen plenty of death, but this was different. This wasn't combat. This was systematic extermination of innocent people. Some soldiers found SS guards who'd been left behind or were trying to hide among the prisoners. What happened next is controversial and difficult to talk about. Some American soldiers, overcome with rage at what they'd seen, killed SS guards on the spot. There are accounts of guards being shot after surrendering. This wasn't official policy. It was soldiers reacting to unimaginable horror. Lieutenant Colonel Sparks tried to maintain discipline. He ordered his men to take prisoners according to the rules of war. But he later admitted he understood why some of his soldiers did what they did. When you see what we saw that day, it takes everything you have not to just start shooting. These SS men had done this. They'd run this death camp. They'd murdered thousands of innocent people. Some of my men couldn't control themselves. The Army later investigated these incidents. Some soldiers were reprimanded, but General Patton, when he heard about it, reportedly said he wouldn't punish soldiers for killing the men who'd run a death camp. The investigations were quietly dropped. Meanwhile, the liberated prisoners were slowly beginning to understand that they were free. After years of torture, starvation, and living in constant fear of death, freedom seemed impossible. Some didn't believe it was real. They thought it was a trick, that the SS would come back. Private First Class Sam Dan from New York tried to reassure prisoners. "We kept telling them, you're safe now. We're Americans. We're here to help you." But they couldn't believe it. They'd been through so much they couldn't process that it was over. One man grabbed my hand and just held it, crying. He couldn't speak. He just held my hand like he was making sure I was real.
The American Army brought in medical teams, food, supplies. They began the enormous task of caring for the thousands of emaciated, sick, dying prisoners. Many prisoners were too far gone to save. In the days and weeks after liberation, hundreds more died despite the best efforts of American medics. The soldiers of the 45th Division sent word up the chain of command about what they'd found. Generals came to see for themselves. War correspondents arrived. Photographers and film crews documented everything. General Eisenhower, when he heard about the camps, ordered that as many American soldiers as possible should see them. He wanted Americans to understand what they'd been fighting against. Eisenhower also ordered that German civilians from nearby towns be brought to the camp to see what had been done in their name. The townspeople of Dachau claimed they didn't know what was happening at the camp. The Americans didn't believe them. How could you not know about a death camp in your town? German civilians were marched through the camp, forced to look at the bodies, the ovens, the evidence of mass murder. Some cried, some fainted, some refused to look. American soldiers made them help bury the dead. It was important the Germans understood what their government had done. For the American soldiers who liberated Dachau, the experience changed them forever. Many couldn't talk about it for years. When they came home after the war, they tried to tell people what they'd seen, but Americans back home couldn't really understand. The horror was too great, too beyond normal human experience. Technician 5th grade John Veitch from Illinois said years later, "I fought from North Africa to Germany. I saw plenty of combat, lost friends, got wounded twice. But Dachau, that's what haunts me. Not the battles, but that camp. Seeing what human beings can do to other human beings. It changed how I saw the world." Dachau wasn't the worst camp. Auschwitz, Treblinka, Sobibor, those were death camps where the Nazis murdered millions. Dachau was primarily a labor and political prisoner camp, though tens of thousands died there too. But for the American soldiers of the 45th Division, Dachau was their first direct encounter with the Holocaust. It showed them what they'd really been fighting against. After the war, some of the SS guards and commanders of Dachau were tried for war crimes. Many were executed, others served prison sentences. But no punishment seemed adequate for what they'd done.
The prisoners who survived owed their lives to the American soldiers who liberated them. Many kept in touch with their liberators for years afterward. They told the soldiers, "You saved us. If you'd come 1 week later, we'd all be dead." The SS was planning to murder all of us before the Americans arrived. In fact, that was true. As Allied forces approached, Hitler had ordered that concentration camp prisoners be killed rather than liberated. In some camps, this happened. The prisoners at Dachau were lucky. The Americans arrived just in time. Today, Dachau is a memorial and museum. Over 800,000 people visit each year to learn about what happened there. The barracks, the guard towers, the crematorium, they're preserved as evidence and as a warning. "Never again" is written in multiple languages at the entrance. But in 1945, the soldiers who liberated it weren't thinking about history or memorials. They were just trying to save as many people as they could and trying to process what they'd witnessed. Private First Class Steve Yosefsky from Michigan summed it up. "We went there as soldiers doing our job. We left understanding what evil really looks like." Before Dachau, the war was about defeating an enemy army. After Dachau, we understood we'd been fighting something much worse than just another army. We'd been fighting pure evil. The liberation of Dachau and the other concentration camps showed the world why World War II had to be fought. It wasn't just about territory or politics. It was about stopping a regime that had industrialized murder, that had tried to exterminate entire groups of people. The American soldiers who liberated those camps became witnesses. They saw the evidence. They talked to the survivors. They looked into the faces of the SS guards who'd run these death factories. And when they came home, they told the world what they'd seen. Some people, even today, try to deny the Holocaust happened. They say it's exaggerated or made up. But the soldiers of the 45th Infantry Division saw it with their own eyes. They photographed it, they filmed it, they testified about it, and they never let anyone forget. Lieutenant Colonel Felix Sparks, who commanded the battalion that liberated Dachau, spent the rest of his life speaking about what he saw there. He said, "Some experiences are so terrible that you can never forget them, no matter how much you might want to. Dachau is my nightmare and my duty. My nightmare because of what I saw. My duty because I have to make sure people know what happened there. As long as I'm alive, the world will remember Dachau."
The soldiers who liberated Dachau carried that burden for the rest of their lives. They'd gone to Germany to defeat an army. What they found was something far worse: evidence of humanity's capacity for organized, systematic evil. It's a heavy thing to carry, knowing what human beings are capable of doing to each other. But they also saw humanity's capacity for survival and hope. The prisoners who survived, who'd endured years of horror and still found the strength to keep living, that was inspiring too. They showed that even in the darkest circumstances, the human spirit can endure. April 29, 1945, the day the 45th Infantry Division liberated Dachau. A day that thousands of prisoners had dreamed about, prayed for, but many didn't believe would ever come. A day that changed every American soldier who was there. A day the world must never forget. Thank you for listening. Remember Dachau. Remember the victims. Remember the survivors. And remember the American soldiers who liberated them and made sure the world would know what happened there.
By the time Dachau was liberated, tens of thousands had already died there. Thousands more were wounded, sick, and scarred for life. Bodies broken by starvation, disease, and cruelty. Minds shattered by fear and torture. Across Europe, the death toll of World War II reached tens of millions. Countless families destroyed, futures stolen, dreams burned to ash. War is a living nightmare. It doesn't just kill, it corrupts the soul. Those who start wars, who order armies to slaughter innocents, are not leaders. They are monsters, cowards, and absolute scum. There is no honor, no glory, no excuse that can ever justify the suffering they cause. Yet even in this horror, the human spirit proved its resilience. Survivors of Dachau, who endured years of unimaginable pain, starvation, and terror, still found a way to live. They reminded the world that even in the darkest darkness, hope can survive. Never forget Dachau. Never forget the victims. Never forget the survivors. And never forget the American soldiers who liberated them, bore witness to evil, and made sure the world would know what happened. History is clear. War is hell, and those who wage it are the worst of humanity. Let this be a warning. We must never let this happen again.